Warning content disclaimer. Matt Knows is an independent commentary channel that examines global political trends through historical and factual lenses. The views presented are for educational purposes and do not reflect an endorsement of any political ideology. Viewer discretion is advised. We support respectful debate and value freedom of speech. Hate speech or harassment will be removed. This video presents multiple expert perspectives. It is not intended to label or defame individuals but to encourage informed discussion. Viewer discretion advised. Imagine waking up one morning to find the political map of Europe turned on its head. Parties once relegated to the fringes are now calling the shots in capitals from Berlin to Rome, championing fear, division, and a brand of nationalism never truly gone. Europe's far right is winning, and today, we're unpacking exactly how and why that's happening, and what it could mean for the future of the continent. Stop. Think about the last election you followed closely. Maybe it was the 2022 French presidential race, maybe it was Germany's 2021 federal vote, or the UK's 2019 Brexit-centered election. Now fast forward to 2024 and early 2025, Germany's Alternative for Germany, AfD, just scored over 20% in a national election, making it the second largest party in the Bundestag. France's National Rally, RN, topped the polls in European Parliament elections with roughly 33% of the vote. The Netherlands Forum for Democracy, FVD, is polling higher than ever. And in the UK, Reform UK is shaking up the Conservative Party by capturing 14% of the vote in the 2024 general election. Add to that the rising Chega party in Portugal or Vlaams Belang in Belgium, and suddenly, pan-European conversation isn't about liberal democracy, but about an unsettling shift toward the far right. In this deep dive, we'll balance the debate. We'll hear why millions of voters feel drawn to these parties. And also confront the critics who warn of an erosion of democracy, growing xenophobia, and the tearing apart of the European project. By the end, we want you, our viewers, to decide for yourselves, is this a legitimate surge born of genuine grievances, or a dangerous, divisive moment we should resist at all costs? And we'll ask you to weigh in below, sparking conversation and controversy in the chat. Remember, you are free to hit that like button, subscribe to our channel, and ring the bell so you never miss a video. Most importantly, please comment with your views and debate the issue in the comments. Let's set the scene. Europe hasn't felt this politically volatile since the 1930s. Inflation, despite mild post-pandemic recoveries, is still stalling wages. Immigration debates keep dominating nightly news. And euroscepticism, once a minority position, has moved to the mainstream. The European Parliament elections of June 2024 were a watershed. While the centre-right European People's Party, EPP, secured 188 of 720 seats, far-right groups like the Identity and Democracy contingent boasted 84 seats, up from just 37 in 2019. Nationally, this translated into headline-grabbing victories. Germany's AfD vaulted into second place in the federal vote, France's RN secured over 31% of the EU-wide ballot, forcing President Macron to call snap legislative races. Austria's Freedom Party, FP, rose to nearly 29% in September 2024, and Portugal's Chega soared to 18% in March 2024. Even Belgium's Vlaams Belang holds 31 of 124 seats in the Flemish parliament, unthinkable a decade ago. These aren't isolated pockets of dissent. They're symptoms of deeper social changes, post-industrial anxiety, perceived cultural displacement from globalization, and, above all, fear of losing control over jobs, neighborhoods, and national identity. But to understand why these parties are winning, we have to hear from their supporters, and also their critics. So let's unpack the arguments from both sides. First, millions of Europeans feel inundated by migration from the Middle East, North Africa, Eastern Europe, and beyond. Whether it's real or perceived, they see neighborhoods changing so rapidly that they fear their own culture is being diluted or erased. In Germany's eastern states, where unemployment is higher and demographics skew older, the AfD has capitalized on these anxieties, promising border closures, expulsion of criminals, and assimilation tests for newcomers.
We have lost control of who gets in. Our fathers and grandfathers built this nation. Now they walk the streets afraid, they ein Voreingangs, herring strange langwages. It's our culture on life support.
These comments resonate. In the 2021 to 2024 period, surveys showed that up to 60% of voters in Germany's rural East believe immigration threatens German culture, a figure that fell to 35% in urban West Germany. The AfD zeroed in on those rural sentiments, promising to put German families first. Second, major portions of Europe, particularly post-industrial regions, face stagnant wages, factory closures, and rising rents. The promise of globalization never fully materialized for working-class families. France's RN, under Marine Le Pen, moved beyond xenophobia. It now champions a protectionist economic program, job guarantees, subsidies for farmers, and higher minimum wages financed by exit from or renegotiation with the EU. Third, there's Euroscepticism, a sense that Brussels is out of touch with everyday Europeans. Repeated scandals, like the revolving door lobbying, the vaccine procurement debacles in 2021, or petty spending on luxury offices, fueled the notion that the European Union is an opaque bureaucracy more interested in quotas and trade deals than in local needs. Far-right parties across Europe, from FVD in the Netherlands to Smitsova in Belgium, channel that cynicism. They argue that surrendering sovereignty to Brussels undermines democracy at home.
Why should Lisbon, or Warsaw, Berlin, or Zagreb take orders from technocrats who've never set foot in our towns? We need to decide our own laws, our own budgets. The EU is a distant machine that doesn't care about us.
In the 2024 European Parliament elections, 74% of AfD voters identified as distrustful of the EU, compared to just 30% of mainstream CDU voters. This wave of skepticism gave the far-right a renewed platform to promise more autonomy, fewer Brussels dictates. Critics argue these far-right arguments come at too high a price with the erosion of democratic norms. When the AfD publicly hosts candidates who praise Nazi-era policies, or when FVD leaders propose banning minority languages, alarm bells ring. Academics warn that far-right governance often correlates with restrictions on press freedom, judiciary independence, and civil liberties. In Austria, after the Freedom Party's FP strong performance in September 2024, investigations began into their use of state funds and potential collusion with extremist groups.
When you start scapegoating minorities, Romani, Muslims, even Eastern Europeans, you're not just stoking fear. You're inching the door open for discrimination to become policy. Next stop, rollbacks on free speech, checks on the judiciary, and an intolerance that eats at the foundations of democracy.
Divide and rule tactics sow social fragmentation. In communities where far-right parties win, incidents of hate crimes often tick upward. For instance, in one study of German towns where AfD topped 25% in local ballots, reports of anti-immigrant vandalism increased by 18% in the subsequent year. In France, after Arendt's European election landslide, police reported a 12% increase in assaults on North African migrants. Critics warn, turning fear of others into policy justification paves the way for violence.
Unio demonize entire communities, segregation and violence follow. License just rhetoric, IT becomes reality. Children see neighbors as enemies. Let us have nations unravel.
Lastly, economic warnings, protectionist promises can backfire. If France withdraws from European trade agreements, say, a hard Frexit in all but name, costs for French farmers could rise, export markets could shrink, and multinational investors might flee. Recall the 2016 Brexit panic, firms relocated jobs, London property prices teetered. A similar logic applies, once you start building walls, economies slow. Critics argue the far-right's populist economics are more fantasy than viable roadmap. Up until recently, Europe had Cordons Sanitaires, unwritten rules preventing mainstream parties from working with the far right. But those walls are crumbling. In Germany's CDU, some leaders debate whether to firewall AfD or to approach them for issue-by-issue deals, especially on immigration policy. In Italy, Giorgia Meloni's Brothers of Italy, a post-fascist party, leads a coalition government with Matteo Salvini's League and Silvio Berlusconi's Forza Italia, once inconceivable in post-1945 Europe. In the Netherlands, the mainstream People's Party for Freedom and Democracy, VVD, and CDA have held informal talks with FVD on environmental policy, simply to secure legislative wins. France is still a rare success story for the firewall. In the 2024 parliamentary runoff, left-wing, centrist, and even moderate right parties united to block RN's path to power, under the banner of the Republican Front. But as RN grows, the question looms. How much longer can that coalition hold? Once you cross the Rubicon of cooperation, it's hard to step back. So, what happens next? We see three broad scenarios. Scenario 1, the center pivot. If mainstream parties, like Germany's CDU/CSU or France's Republicans, admit policy failures, adopt tougher immigration stances without veering to xenophobia, and prioritize improving living standards for struggling families, they could reclaim lost voters. Experts argue that by directly addressing disparities, investing in education, housing, retraining, governments can undercut far-right populist appeals. Scenario 2, normalization. Over the next decade, far-right parties entrench themselves, perhaps winning regional governments in Germany, forming coalitions in Austria or the Netherlands, and capturing more European Parliament seats. With no credible firewall, they gain ministerial portfolios affecting immigration, law enforcement, and education. Civil liberties erode, media faces pressure to self-censor, NGOs face stifling regulations, and independent judges become targets. We'd witness the birth of a European illiberal bloc, echoing patterns seen in Hungary under Viktor Orbán or Poland under the Law and Justice Party, leading to EU condemnations, budget freezes, and growing divides between East and West Europe. Scenario 3, a left-wing or liberal uprising. Civil society mobilizes, youth lead mass protests, digital campaigns flood social media with pro-multicultural messaging, and grassroots coalitions push for local referenda to limit far-right influence. In the 2025 Polish mayoral races, proposed, coalition candidates might defeat law and justice affiliates. In Italy, local referenda could curtail Brothers of Italy's authority on police powers. Meanwhile, voter turnout climbs, particularly among young, urban professionals who've so far sat on the sidelines. This pressure forces mainstream parties to take unequivocal stances against far-right policies, ultimately shifting the pendulum back toward a centrist or center-left majority on the EU stage. So, Europe stands at a crossroads. Far-right parties ride a wave of fear of the immigrant other, fear of lost economic opportunity, fear of a distant Brussels diktat. On the other side, advocates for inclusion, for civic solidarity, and for a shared European identity stand their ground, warning that the price of letting these forces win is too high: division, social unrest, and the unraveling of the democratic norms so many generations fought to build. We've given you the facts, the voices, and the warnings. Now we want to know what you think. Will mainstream parties reinvent themselves and reclaim Europe? Will the far right keep its momentum, reshaping the continent into something unrecognizable? Or will grassroots opposition rise in time? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Share your perspective, whether you're for tougher immigration controls, for stronger multiculturalism, or for any other stance. If you found this video insightful, hit that like button, subscribe to our channel, and ring the bell so you never miss another deep dive into the ideas shaping our world. Thanks for watching. Let's keep the conversation going.